Yo, what's up, history fans? So, picture this. It's 60 AD in Roman Britain, and a Celtic queen who's just been publicly flogged and had her daughters violated is about to lead one of the most brutal uprisings against the Roman Empire ever recorded. I'm talking about Boudica, warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, who burned 3 Roman cities to the ground and killed 80,000 people before facing the legions in an epic final battle. This is a story of revenge, resistance, and one of history's most badass women. Let's get right into it. In the east of Britain lives a tribe called the Iceni. Its people are scattered in sloping villages or sparsely clustered along the edges of wind-swept pastures. Their allegiance lies with their king, Suetonius. War is basically a constant thing in his land, just like everywhere else at this time, and though it's definitely sharpened the skills of his warriors, the marching columns and foreign banners now crossing the countryside carry a certain finality to them. Some tribes have surrendered without even putting up a fight, while others have been humbled by the sword. The aging Suetonius doesn't dare to openly defy an empire that's conquered so much of the known world. So he makes this proclamation. After his reign, the kingdom will be ruled partly by the Romans and partly by his 2 daughters. Pretty reasonable compromise, right? Wrong. When the king dies, instead of some peaceful transition of power happening, the Romans straight up confiscate the land of Iceni nobles and trespass on the estates of the dead king. His daughters? They violate them. And Boudica, the queen herself, is dragged out, bound to a post, and publicly flogged. She's left slumped in a pool of her own blood. Here is the queen of the Iceni, Boudica, brutally humiliated by Rome. Now, here's some background on how we got here. It was Julius Caesar who first invaded Britain back in 55 and 54 BC. The men of Rome emerged from the fog to scatter the coastal tribes, but it was Emperor Claudius in 43 AD who began the serious conquest. The occupying Romans generally considered the preliterate people of Britain to be savages with this debased and ferocious inclination, practitioners of weird superstitions that needed to be tamed by the advancing forces of Rome. The righteousness of this mission was no doubt supported by the grandeur of Rome itself, the eternal city and its subject lands. Founded on the legend of Romulus and filled with stories of the old gods, the city of Rome had this certain brilliance. It had raised these incredible monuments, aqueducts, and produced philosophers of ethics, logic, and nature, along with great artists and exceptional warriors. But here's the thing. The violent conquest of other lands and enslavement of the defeated people greatly contributed to all this prosperity. Not exactly noble, right? The empire is now ruled by the young Emperor Nero. His representative in Britain is the Governor Suetonius Paulinus, who at this moment finds himself in the Isle of Mona, crushing the stronghold of the Druid priestly class. And far away, the woman with the torn back, Queen Boudica, rises to rally her tribe. In contrast to the Roman view of them, the tribes of Britain are actually pretty complex, with existing cultural and material connections to the European continent, along with old oral traditions and serious skills in metalworking, herding animals, and agriculture. Boudica knows that many other chieftains have chosen surrender as a means of survival, where tribal hierarchies might be maintained under Roman imperial authority. But the queen's distrust of the Romans is shared by another tribe called the Trinovantes. This tribe had traditionally occupied the city of Camulodunum, but the Romans forced the inhabitants off the land, founding a fortress and now this extravagant Roman colony at the site. So the Trinovantes, together with the Iceni, marched behind Queen Boudica. The motives of this revolt might also include the financial strains of Roman rule, heavy taxation, and mounting debts owed to Roman citizens. These and other elements of the story remain kind of fuzzy because our knowledge of the revolt largely comes from 2 ancient authors, Tacitus, writing around the year 100 AD, and Cassius Dio, writing around 200 AD. Tacitus was almost certainly informed by eyewitness testimony, since his close father-in-law, Agricola, served in Britain during the revolts and later became governor of the province. And Dio appears to have had access to earlier accounts now lost to time. Nevertheless, both writers have this tendency to make up speeches to critique contemporary Roman politics, and to some extent, both depict the people of Britain as persecuted but nonetheless savage people. In any case, the very real wrath of Boudica and her rebel army first reaches the tiled houses and elegant streets of Camulodunum. The furious sound of war horns and battle shrieks engulfs the colony in this scene of total pillage and carnage. The town garrison and an ill-prepared Roman relief force of 200 fall back to the Temple of Claudius. For days they hold out before the British warriors completely annihilate them. Dio writes that the rebels mutilate and sacrifice the civilians they capture, raising these festering rows of impaled Roman women. Now, the more colorful claims of sacrifice and sadism should probably be taken with some skepticism, but an enduring layer of ash, the remains of a monumental colony, does indeed suggest a total destruction of the town and everyone left in it. The Roman 9th Legion marches out to relieve the smoldering town. The army of Boudica charges out to meet them, wiping out the Roman infantry while the cavalry flees. The breaking of Roman rule is underway, but crossing the island with serious speed is the Governor Suetonius. As he gallops into the modest Roman trade center of Londinium, that's London, throngs of panicked people are begging for his protection, but he won't risk a final battle here. Those willing and able to march escape with the army, while the elderly, weak, and those stubbornly attached to their homes are left behind to die. When the rebels come, they burn it down house by house. Tacitus records that the Roman town of Verulamium also falls to rebels, and Dio says that in total 80,000 Romans and their allies died, and the island was lost to Rome. Moreover, all this destruction was brought upon the Romans by a woman, a fact which in itself caused them the greatest shame. Pretty brutal stuff. So now Suetonius can't delay any longer. He's raised 10,000 men at the edge of a deep wood, and there he sees a plain absolutely flooding with enemy warriors. Wave by wave come the chanting warriors, beating their shields and spears and swords, charging forth in chariots. Tens of thousands of them have come at last to banish the power of Rome, to fight for their defiant Queen Boudica. Behind the tribesmen is this line of wagons from which their wives, convinced of victory, have come to watch the battle. Suetonius goes before his troops, and according to Dio, he reminds them that they're Romans, favored by the gods, rulers of the world. He reminds them of the crimes of the rebels, the charred cities and slain countrymen, and he assures them that surrender now won't be met with mercy. He basically says, it would be better for us to fall fighting bravely than to be captured and impaled, to look upon our own entrails cut from our bodies. Let us therefore either conquer them or die on the spot. Britain will be a noble monument for us, even though all the other Romans here should be driven out, for in any case, our bodies shall forever possess this land. Pretty hardcore motivational speech. Boudica rides in a chariot before her own ranks. She condemns the cowardice and greed of the Romans, and Tacitus writes that she commands her warriors to take their just revenge. Her speech goes, "It is not as a woman descended from noble ancestry, but as well the people that I am avenging lost freedom, my scourged body, the outraged chastity of my daughters. Roman lust has gone so far that not our very persons, or even age or rigidity, are left unpolluted." With this terrible sound of battle cries, the two armies clash. Javelins sink into torsos, chariots splinter, and swords pierce flesh. The Roman wedge formation cracks the rebel line. Fighting erupts all around. Shields and blades, blood and dead bodies carpet the plain. The rebels turn to flee. But here's the problem. They're trapped by the line of wagons behind them. They're chased down and killed by the thousands. Tacitus writes that the Roman troops gave no quarter even to the women. The baggage animals themselves have been speared and added to the pile of bodies. Absolutely brutal massacre. The surviving rebels, Boudica among them, managed to escape, lying low with intentions to restart the revolt. But their numbers are failing, as is the strength of Boudica herself. The rebel queen dies, either by ingesting poison or succumbing to injury or disease. The sources aren't clear. The Britons mourned her deeply and gave her this expensive burial, but feeling that now they were really defeated, they scattered back to their homes. Suetonius then widely punishes the inhabitants of Britain and hunts for any remnants of dissent. Emperor Nero responds by replacing him with a more peaceful governor, not out of mercy, but out of fear that too much persecution might reignite the flame of rebellion. Smart political move. But in Rome itself, Nero soon faces another group that defies the authority of the empire. It's thought that Nero blamed Christians for starting the Great Fire of Rome, and Tacitus writes that Nero punished with extreme cruelty this group of people hated for their practices whom the crowd called Christians. He writes, Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate. The pernicious superstition was checked for a moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the disease, but in the capital itself. The confessed members of this sect were arrested. Vast numbers were convicted. They were covered with wild beast skins and torn to death by dogs. They were fastened on crosses, and when daylight failed were burned to serve as lamps by night. Nero had offered his gardens for the spectacle. Subjugation and conquest weren't just habits of Nero, though. They were persistent features of the empire itself. With the revolt in Britain crushed, the Romans rebuilt Londinium into a sprawling capital and constructed a town on old Iceni lands. The Roman hold on Britain survived the death of Nero and lasted for 3 centuries more. Boudica becomes this distant image, a veiled impression forgotten by many, only to be redrawn centuries later, embellished in chronicles, poems, and plays from the medieval period onward. British audiences saw in her a barbaric butcher and ancestral shame, or a patriot and example of female fortitude. She's been cast sometimes as a figure of anti-imperialism, and elsewhere as the martyred godmother of the British Empire. And just like it had been in the time of the Romans, the portrait of this ancient woman of the Iceni tribe doesn't appear in detailed relief, but often as a reflection of those who tell her tale. So yeah, that's the incredible and tragic story of Boudica's revolt against Rome. This Celtic queen went from being publicly humiliated to leading an army of 100,000 warriors, burning 3 major Roman cities to ground, and killing 80,000 people before being defeated in one final epic battle. Even though she lost in the end, her legacy as a symbol of resistance against oppression has lived on for nearly 2,000 years. Pretty badass when you think about it. If you're into stories of ancient rebellions and warrior queens, this is definitely one for the books. Stay curious, everyone. Peace out.